assistant
All right.
audio clicker.
Good evening. This is the May 19th meeting of the Charter Committee. Tonight we're going to continue our review of the executive authority. And we have Mel's on the line with us. I'm going to get us started, I guess. Anything else we need to talk about before we start, team? No. All right, Mel, you're on.
Okay, well, actually, I'm sort of waiting for Anthony, but let me make some remarks initially about the document you received and the intent of how we're going to go through that this evening.
Okay.
This document, which is actual draft language, charter language for the executive sections, and there are actually two sections, even though executive is shared between the select board and the town administrator. There typically are two sections. They're very complementary sections, but nonetheless, there are two sections. So we're going to go through the sections that we have prepared language for both the select board and the town manager, town administrator. We think we've determined the title yet, but we can talk about that. And I think the point we want to make is that this is not our recommendation, this draft. This draft is really intended to bring together elements of a charter and actual language, and we try to include more language than not, just to help facilitate the committee's discussion of these policy issues. So I want to make that clear. We drafted using some Collins Center draft, but we also used your bylaws, looking at the Littleton bylaws, and also looking at a couple of other charters, Groton and I think Medway in particular, we identified. My feeling is that you get 2 or 3 charters, and you're pretty much going to have the range of kind of language that exists out there. So we tried to give you more language than less in order to facilitate some of this discussion. Let's see. While we're going to be talking about board and committee appointments and some supervision issues, it's not our intent this evening to discuss whether an elected board should be appointed or vice versa. There is a whole section of that in the charter, and it's possible that when you get to appointment issues, you may want to defer some of that until you have that discussion about which boards and committees, what their status will be. The other issue is we have other sections that will dive deeper into in certain administrative areas, especially the budget, and some other areas that you just talk a little bit about in this executive section, and then later you get into more detail. That's especially the case around the budget and finance. And then, let's see, we looked at some of your, one of the other points about the draft is we are assuming from the discussions that the committee has had to date and some of the dialogue that we're looking at trying to consolidate and strengthen to some extent, I guess is a word to use, the administrative functions of the town. So our draft is intended to create more of a stronger administrative authority. And so, we're not assuming that that's the direction you're definitely going to go, but we wanted to provide that again in order to generate some discussion. So I think with that, we will get right into the draft, unless, Madam Chair, if anybody has any questions or comments. Also, I notice Anthony is trying to get in, and he's going to be doing the screen sharing. So if there's any questions about this draft or what's expected for this evening, it would be a good chance to do that now.
Anybody have any specific questions going through here?
In the document, the whole document?
What's the ones for today? Yep.
Yes, I have questions about the document.
Well, I think it's just more general. I think until we're going to go through it in detail pretty soon here, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We've got a lot of questions about it.
Okay.
A lot of questions.
Maybe it's just as well then to go dive right into it. And until Anthony gets on, I think I'm going to have to just rely that you have the document in front of you and I can reference it. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're good.
Point of clarification.
Sorry.
point of clarification, when you asked about questions, are you asking specifically around Article 3 and Article 6, which we're reviewing tonight, or everything?
No, I was referring to 3 and 6.
Okay, thanks.
And just if you had any questions before we start diving into the details, that's all.
Is there something else you were thinking of, aside from these, that you wanted to talk about?
More point of clarification because
Okay.
I think you had questions about the charter itself.
I do. Yes, I have some, on page 1.
Oh, so you're talking about the
Charter, they got emailed out to us?
This
Maybe I
one.
don't have the right one.
this one that's got the yellow date at the top? This was the updated version. Is that the one you're talking about? This with
Yeah,
the
it's
yellow
like-
at the top?
Wasn't the
As
same
of May
email,
15th.
Yep.
Look at the wrong draft then.
Yeah, this was, he's just sent this out, I don't know, this week it was.
For example, in section 1.4, it speaks to the division of powers, and it mentions the executive branch and the legislative branch. Is the town manager and other town, is there an administrative branch here that, and if yes, should it be represented in section 1.4?
Are you referring to this document that we have the draft executive sections in front of us?
Yes,
314, I don't see 314.
it's 1-4. He's looking at 1-4, Mel. The very
Oh,
top,
section-
beginning.
Article 1, okay.
Section 1-4.
Yeah, I don't have that. I was not prepared to, I think Anthony is
All
prepared
right.
to talk about that.
All right, let's just wait then. How's he
He's,
doing?
he's,
wanna hold
he's
on.
lacking the link to the meeting, so I'm gonna have to just send that to him, I guess. Or is anybody there that can do that? It was in Lisa Montgomery's email earlier last week.
Do a race and see who can get to it first.
Let me see if I can do
We'll
it
just
quickly.
bombard him with links.
Got it.
God,
You don't want to take side bets?
Sit down and have his
See
email.
who's going to win? We got 3 contenders.
That's right.
forward.
Do.
What is Anthony's? A
I'm able to, I just pasted, so.
Okay.
I guess we're ready to go if he can use that, hopefully. Okay, so I'm not prepared, Betsy, to talk about the legislative. I think we have to wait until Anthony gets here, so we can either wait or we can dive into some of the issues in sections, articles 3 and 6.
All right, well, let's keep moving. Let's do 3 and 6, and we'll come back.
Okay. All right, so why don't we go right to the second page. Article 3 is the select board. So, the select board by law, by Massachusetts law and the Constitution, and they are the executive body of a town government. There's no getting around that. There's really no way to make town manager the executive authority of doing things that the select board is intended to do, some of the main executive requirements of the job. So the select board clearly is the executive body of the town, and we have a whole, most charters have a whole section about the select board. Many of the things will not be mentioned because they're embedded in the general laws. But Anthony said he's in and needs to be promoted, so why don't we do that, and then he'll start sharing the screen that we're talking about. So in section 311 is really just setting up what the select board is. I believe that's consistent with the way Littleton, you have 5 members, 3-year terms, staggered terms, and then now the vacancies, I believe that just references the general laws in the charter. So 311, really, there's really no policy issues here, unless there's something I'm missing. Is there anything relative to the composition of the select board that's not in this 311?
Can I just ask one question? The phrase selectmen, is that a required?
Microphone. Yeah, I saw that too. That may just be this document, but you can ask them.
Yeah, the phrase selectmen, I thought it transitioned. Can you address if that's a required phrase or if that's subject to change?
It isn't. I think that was a typo. We're going to try to make all of the references to Board of Selectmen to select board. I think we may need to create a little intro to that in the or maybe in the definition section, because in the general laws, it still is referred to as selectmen, Board of Selectmen, but most modern charters use the phrase of select board, and we will do that as well everywhere, and probably make some notation that that's the
Within the body of that section, it says select board.
Well, it flipped
Yes.
313 as selectmen again, so it needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah, it will be. The intent, by the way, is to use select board in all cases.
Thank you.
So that's 311. 312, and thank you, Anthony, for putting this up. This is a restriction that I've seen in many charters, but I didn't notice it in Littleton, and frankly don't know if this is something that the committee wants to address, or there isn't any issues here. But essentially, this is a restriction that any person serving on the select board, cannot, may not serve on another board or be an officer of the town in any capacity, regardless of whether compensation is received. So that would certainly include employees of the town and members of other multiple member bodies or another town official. That's just thrown out there. That's really not our recommendation necessarily.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that for a minute, yeah.
I have one question on that, and that someone who might be a select board member might also be a basketball coach, which makes them an employee. So how would you make that exception to a situation like that? Would that select board person no longer be able to coach high school basketball? Or?
Well, that's a good question. And I think, obviously the intent is to avoid conflicts of interest, not legal conflicts of interest necessarily, but just creating a higher level for the select board members. It's a good question. I will check on that and get back to you on that. My initial reaction would be yes, that would be the case, that they would be prohibited from doing that.
The current select board that we have opted to allow select board members to be members of other committees. For instance, the committee I sit on, LCTV, has a select board member who is a member of that board. So I kind of think, at least with the current board, they think that that's the way to go.
And they're a voting member on the board as well.
Yes.
Because I know Jim Carr was on the White Water, wasn't he, when he was a selectman?
No, I don't believe so.
No?
That's separately elected, so I think he went off select board
Okay.
and then ran for
And then for that one?
Light and Water.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, currently that's what they're doing, so.
Okay.
I could see where
And
there'd
they're
be,
voting members on these bodies.
I could see where there'd be a potential
Sometimes-
conflict of interest. Because if I'm on the select board, I have a say in which, what things are brought to the town meeting. I have a say in which way, presumably, which way funds go. So if I'm a basketball coach, for example, and I want new jerseys, I might use my position of power in the select board to try to influence other select boardmen to get new jerseys for the team, for example, instead of, I'm not saying it's happening,
Run for school
but
committee.
it opens the door for it to happen. So if we have the opportunity to prevent it from happening, assuming everyone is on the up and up today, but we can't guarantee that in the future of people that we vote into the select board.
Good point. I just brought it up because I thought it happened in the
Oh, I'm
past.
not saying that you're advocating for it one way or the other. I'm just using your example as how it could be, perverted.
Tim?
Yeah, I think historically, we haven't had the problem. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind is a number of years ago, the chief of police, Tom O'Day, ran for the Board of Health, was elected, so served simultaneously as chief in the Board of Health. He subsequently ran for the Board of Selectmen and won as well. But I think in between there, he may have retired as chief. But that was kind of the closest sort of situation that I can think of. And, and he actually was a great select board member, so, it was nothing nefarious. I guess I'm thinking that ultimately, we're going to end up going to town meeting and ask them to, say yea or nay to a new charter. And I think we've got a lot of town employees that go to town meeting. I think it goes down a lot easier if we're not telling them you can't do something. You can't run for the Board of Selectmen if you wanted to. I think it happens, once in a blue moon maybe, not even that often, but I think people could perceive it negatively if they're being told that, they came up with this new charter, and then what it says is you can't be on the Board of Selectmen.
Does it say that, or does it say you just have to vacate your previous position? It's not saying you
If you're
can't.
well,
Employee, it's your job.
I think, as I recall, historically, you could have, under the ethics laws, you could have two town positions. You just had to choose which one you'd be compensated for.
Yeah.
And most chose their regular compensation rather than the stipend they got for being on the board.
But that didn't preclude them from holding the position, they just weren't paid twice.
Right. It wasn't, there was no, it wasn't, there wasn't a preclusion. I don't know. I guess, it's all dependent on the situation. I think in the past, people that have run for boards and have a perceived axe to grind against, if a town employee were to run for selectman because they have an axe to grind with the board, I think the voters generally see through that sort of thing.
Yep, they usually go down as flames,
Yeah.
so.
And it hasn't been a problem, but.
Okay, Rob?
Yeah, I support it as written. Ethics, the appearance, you often get into, it's not a matter of whether it exists, it's the appearance of it. And given that we're a group making a recommendation to the select board, I'd find myself wanting to support recommending the avoidance of such entanglements as some of the things we've just discussed in the last 5 minutes. I wouldn't even put it out to the voters. I think it's rather, for me, it's a very easy call to say, put it like this.
So isn't it sometimes it's almost by design? I mean, you want select board members involved in certain areas. I mean, sometimes we do that, right? You assign them to be part of something else? Or is that not?
They could still do that ex officio.
On this,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. 'Cause-
They're not.
But they're not voting
But
members.
there was a discussion here about whether there would be one here as a voting member. They decided against it, but that was part of the discussion of this team, of whether there would be
Right.
a voting member on here from the select board.
But the fact that they said no, I think, was because they identified the appearance of influence and moving this process in a direction that they thought they should be hands-off. I have certainly no problem with the numerous select board people that participate as advisors, like Gary serves as this. But that lacks a vote, and I think it should lack a vote.
When I was on FinCom, like you were on, I was also on the CPC, but that was a voting member, and things like that. I mean, you're out there and you're supposed to be part of it.
As a select board member?
No, I was on FinCom, but it was just the same concept. It's not the same thing, but
I don't see, if you're talking about CPC, isn't that where it's rather stacked with regard to representatives from one group support and bring all kind of a head of heads or a representative group? You've got CONSCOM, you've got numerous
Yeah.
within CPC, and that's very intentional, I think,
It
with
was
regard.
intentional for
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
intentional,
FinCom members.
Yeah, I know.
and that's okay.
Okay.
Raise
Just-
hand.
Just saying. Okay, go ahead. Guys, is it Mel or Anthony? You
Oh,
have your
yeah,
hands
I
up.
was going to say, this notion of having select board being appointed, whether ex officio or in some other capacity to other bodies, especially temporary bodies, so whether they, be override committees or some committees like yours, you can still do that in the charter. So if you wanted to keep this language and retain that, we would probably add, unless otherwise, called for or something. We would create language that would allow, under certain circumstances and certain language, board members to serve as a representative or a member of other bodies. So, this was a tough one. We didn't want to give you a real tough one right from the beginning, but it is one because, I think sometimes people are assuming there's a problem, and we do not assume there is a problem. But we did think that it, to show you a common restriction that exists in a charter for select board would be worthwhile. But again, you can debate it. You don't have to make a decision this evening, but that's what it was there for.
Okay, sounds like that'll be an ongoing discussion, it sounds like. Anybody else want to talk about it now? Joe,
I'd
you
leave
have
it there
something?
for now. It's there for a good reason we can talk about later on. If it's-
Okay. All right.
Go
ahead, Kevin.
Sometimes I use, I guess, exaggerated examples to make a point. Would we be okay with the town administrator or town manager being elected to the select board also?
Oh. Then it's your boss.
If not, how do we prevent that from happening? And do we prevent all town employees from serving as select people? Or is there people in executive capacity or decision-making capacity or what? But in my exaggerated example, I would want to prevent the town manager from being elected as a select person.
If I may, so there is a section of state law that does cover, there's the conflict of interest law, particularly section 21A. Now, we're not serving as legal counsel, but it does specifically talk about members of boards, municipal boards and commissions not being able to serve, whether appointed, whether compensated or uncompensated, for an appointed position over which they have the appointment authority or have the ability to supervision authority. So, I'll give everyone the site. We can circulate the language, but it's 268A, section 21A, and you may want to talk to legal counsel. What Mel put together is like some standard language that we see across charters that covers this, but sort of as you delve into that, I think you want to just be cognizant of that particular statute.
So this is interesting. So in today's environment where maybe you're on the board of one of these boards that doesn't report to the town manager, it's a little bit different. Well, because they don't go to the select board then necessarily, they're their own elected officials, right? But once you say everybody's going to report, or most people are going to report to the town manager, now you've got a relationship, an employee-manager relationship there with the select board, and so that changes some of that too as well. Interesting. Okay, all right.
All right.
Good conversation. Think on
Moving
it.
on in that case.
Noodle a little bit.
In 313, really just asserts the executive powers of the select board that are basically referencing general laws. And then we get into some details. So A through G are certain elements of the select board's authority. A is the chief policymaking board of the town. That's a fairly common understanding term. And then B is authority to enter into agreements, legal agreements. Now, some of these agreements might require town meeting approval if they have funding requirements or there's procurement issues. But for the most part, the select board can reach agreements with parties, and if they have to have contingencies for other things, that's fine. But they're the board that represents the town and can make agreements on behalf of the town. The C is an interesting article because it not only identifies their executive authority on policy issues, but there is a section, and it's very common in modern charters, that is part of the last part of this provision. Nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize any member of the select board or a majority of such members to become involved in the day-to-day administration of any town agency and so on. And I think that's a really important concept. If you are trying to really give the town manager or town administrator administrative authority, then you really need to keep the select board focused on the policy. And it's not just enough in this section to say you're we focused on policy, saying, and you will not, be involved in the administration of affairs. So that's I'm just explaining that section. It's a kind of a meaty section, so I'll stop there if there's any questions or concerns.
Rob?
Yeah. Not with that section, I'm fine with that phrasing, but rather in the first sentence, the reference with regard to all town agencies serving under it. So I find myself questioning aspects with regard to, light department. We see this dovetail into the town meeting where we've got these presentation of different groups that I think are relatively autonomous, if not completely autonomous, and yet we see annual budgets being presented with town meeting vote, et cetera. School would be another one that I'd say there's a distinct separation between the select board and the school committee per se. So I think rather than have this, what I view as somewhat vague, this might be standard language, but I'd much more prefer to see something along the lines of except for, so that there's a clear understanding with regard to the expansive powers in C that don't apply to whatever would be determined to be, autonomous.
Rob, where are you
It's in
from?
the second line under C, so 313C, the second line, it reads, be responsible formulation and promulgation of policy directives, guidelines to be followed, quote, by all town agencies serving under it. And that's where I start to want to differentiate school, for example, because, again, trying to be transparent as we present a proposal, should we present that for a charter, I wouldn't want there to be confusion with regard to thinking that somehow we're putting an arm around the school committee.
But isn't that part of the town? Like, why are we carving out?
I think this, and I will admit, I lack experience with regard to some of these things, but I see,
I'm just asking a question.
I see the reach. So I think the school committee, elected group by law, operates extremely independently of select board. The school committee, as I've viewed it, comes together periodically with select board, FinCom, to have discussions, but in the meetings I've attended, there's a very clear delineation where the chair, Justin, concedes or agrees with regard to way to work together, but makes, often says during the meeting, however, I will be taking this back to my committee. Like, he doesn't even want to make statements of agreement without full endorsement at a subsequent meeting of the school
But you don't think where it says agencies serving under it, that covers it?
That's, to me, the confusion, because at town meeting, for example, we see light budget isn't presented, at least I don't think. Tim, others of you can correct me. I don't think the light department budget is presented, but the water is, and sewer is. And so we see these groups that seemingly operate, in my opinion, independent, and yet they are at town meeting where, honestly, I think that's where most residents would start to see who operates what, maybe even come away with an expectation if I saw it in the town meeting warrant. So therefore, why would it be there, and why, if I want to talk to the TA or the town manager about something pertaining to the water department, why wouldn't I just pick up the phone and call Jim? Except that's not appropriate. You should call Nick.
Didn't general laws cover that in terms of school departments, at least?
Yeah, I guess the way I'm reading is that the school department wouldn't be a town agency serving under the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, because the general laws specify that they're totally
The
different.
select board can make policies that are followed town-wide, but only for those employees and departments that once it says, that serve under it.
I think the terminology.
Schools are kind of a separate organization, just like the light department's kind of a municipal corporation that's set up,
Yeah.
One thing we don't have in town right now is an org chart that shows all that.
Well,
I agree with that, and I've asked for that.
Yeah, correct. And I think if we were to have an addendum that would identify
Right.
town agencies, that would be another solution
Right.
that I'd be for, town agencies that fall within the, responsibility of select board, and list all those that do. That would help to be transparent to me and not cause seemingly confusion by
This has to do with
neglect.
their policy-making authority, which is, logically, they're making policy for the general municipal side of government. They're not making policies to apply to the school board and to the
I understand, but I think
schools.
Rob's point is, though, the casual person or the citizen just reads this and they don't understand that. They
Yeah.
go to town
Oh, yeah,
meeting and
yeah.
it's all one thing, and they don't know that
Sure.
the school department's separate, water's in, but lights out, and that
Be
kind of
nice
stuff.
to
So
see it,
just
yeah,
to somehow spell it out
represented
more.
visually.
That's his point.
That's correct.
Some transparency to it.
Just add that in.
Well, so then the point is,
I don't think you add it
I don't
here.
think we
think
add it.
Yeah,
I think-
exactly.
I think your point is made later on in some document.
Yes.
We can have a little chart or
That'd be
something.
fine. That was all. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to bog us down.
no.
Mel, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I would say that, I think that the language is intended to be talking about appointed bodies under the jurisdiction of the select board, because it says all town agencies serving under it, and then the next part of the sentence says, and in conjunction with other elected town officers and multiple member bodies to develop and promulgate policy guidelines, more cooperative. So I think it's clearly any elected body, I think, retains their own sort of policy guidance or direction, definitely the school department. So if you wanted to create exceptions, I think we could do that. I would rather create exceptions and list all the departments that are in, rather than just do the exceptions. We are going to be talking a little later about some of the administrative areas that the town manager may or may not be involved in, and probably we'll talk a little bit about exceptions in those sections too. So I made a note, and we'll go back to this at some point.
Okay, all right.
Moving on.
All right, good.
D is very standard language causing the bylaws and the basically rules and regulations of government be enforced, and cause an up-to-date record of its official acts to be kept, which are by law anyway. So that's a pretty standard phrase. And then the next one really is, I think, probably one of the key ones you're going to be talking about is E, and that is, who does the select board appoint compared to who the town manager appoints? Now, even though the town manager, the select board will approve the town manager appointments in many cases, they're not making the appointment themselves. And so this section is, who are we going to keep as directly being appointed by the select board? Now, clearly, the town manager is one. That's the key position. Many towns have other bodies, sometimes department heads, key department heads, and in fact, you have in your bylaws the select board appointing the chief of police. But other towns also have town council. The legal officer is often appointed directly by the select board. Sometimes certain boards and committees, we have to talk about boards and committees in general, but some committees are sort of higher than others, like zoning board of appeals or planning board, things like that. So this is a very important section, and as far as I can tell, right now in Littleton, the select board appoint the town administrator, they appoint the chief of police, and they appoint, I think, literally all the boards and committees. If there's other appointments that are made directly without the town administrator's involvement, I'm not aware of them, but perhaps we could have some discussion and see if there's any other boards and committees, officials that the committee thinks which should stay with the select board exclusively.
Do they have a role in the individual police officers? Because I know there's always a kind of a ceremony. What is the story of that?
Not since the town adopted the strong police chief statute,
Okay.
and now the police chief directly appoints
Okay.
officers under him, but
Okay.
I think they bring them in for the dog and
Okay.
pony show now. But
Okay.
in the past, the chief had to bring anyone in that was being appointed.
Now there's just, he's introducing them and they're saying welcome. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not how I understood it, to be honest.
Well, that's how I understand it.
That's how it is.
To be honest.
I'd like to get that clarified. I'd ask that be clarified. I've heard from somebody else that the fire chief operates that way, but the police chief does not. So I'd just like, or I'll go get it clarified myself outside of the meeting.
And the fire chief is appointed by the select.
Well, yeah, that's an omission here. The fire chief's an important one. It's appointed by select board. McCurdy was just appointed last.
Well, I know the police chief is a strong chief. I was moderator when we voted it. So. And my mother opposed it, so. I can't forget that particular night. Yeah.
But that was just the police, not the fire?
That was, at that time, it was just the police chief, yeah. I don't know, I can't recall if the fire chief is strong or weak, but
The fire chief is strong, too.
Yeah, it's strong.
They both have the ability.
Regardless of whether they're strong or weak, I mean, they are appointed by somebody, and,
the chiefs.
But the point is, the people under them, do they appoint them, or
Yeah.
does the select board appoint the people
I'd
under them?
have to look at the underlying statute or the bylaw. I think the police department bylaw covers that. That's,
All right, well, we can,
there's a special section about police in the bylaws, and I thought it covered the appointment of the employees, but I'd have to look at that.
so I'm curious even about the town council. Is that a position in the town, or is that just a contract with them to do the work? You made it sound like that was somebody who was appointed, but I didn't know.
Well, some communities have in-house counsel,
Excuse me.
and that person is an employee of the town, they have an office in town hall.
Okay.
But
we don't do that.
we have a contract with.
Okay, so we don't
Yeah.
have that here.
They're
Okay.
called town council, it's official, it's a position,
But
but
it-
the board,
Hires them to do it.
yeah, I think
Okay.
that should be the case, I mean.
I think we would probably, at some point, recommend that position be listed somewhere, regardless of who appoints it. It's a fairly significant position, and
They list all the
I think it's somewhat confused about it.
Book, right? Everybody
Say
that's,
that, I'm sorry, say it again, Tim?
in the annual report, the
Yeah.
list of all the appointments by the select board, starting, elected,
Mm-hmm.
and, I mean, everyone who holds any kind of a position in the town
Yeah.
is listed
Okay.
annually, so that's why you can track their terms and who appoints them and so forth.
So then the
But is that
question.
considered a term, the town council? They're
Well,
appointed for a
It's an
term?
annual, unless there's a longer agreement with them, there might be, I don't know.
I
There might be a
I
3-year
just never thought about it that way. I just thought
Yeah.
that we had a contract with a lawyer and you're going to do the work for us, but it's more official than that.
It's an annual term.
Okay.
At the very least, yeah.
Rob's got his annual report. He's so good.
So is the question really, do we take anything out from under the select board and
Right.
give that to the town manager? Is that what we're looking at?
I think the
This
reference, we'll
Yeah.
probably get to it, some of the appointed boards and committees, I think that is the piece of it that
Right.
would go with the, a town manager or administrator. I think it's appropriate that the board appoints the police chief, the fire chief, the town council, as was suggested. I mean, it's going to be their attorney in a sense, so they should
Right.
make that appointment.
So I agree. I find, and we've done this several meetings, and I think we'll continue, different sections, like board and committees, that's going to dovetail. We're going to be overlapping, we're continuing to overlap.
Yep.
This one, I find myself needing clarity with regard to how it exists today, elected versus appointed, whether the MOUs, whether it should continue the way it is today with all the MOUs, or should it be changed? And then falling out from that discussion, to me, would be filling in the blanks here with regard to the, a better determination for myself as to understanding the select board's authority with regard to appointment, or the town manager now be given authority as opposed to the select board.
Yeah, I would say here, it's just kind of like, there's very specific things like the police chief. Do people agree, everybody agree that the select board ought to appoint the police chief, or is that, or not? I mean, are there some specific things here we say, absolutely, that's the way it should be? And then we still know we have all these boards, there's all kinds of things. But are there some specific things you want to call out now, or just
Sort
leave
of.
it?
Well, the chiefs, I would submit that they should be called out as the board appointing them along
Appointing
with the
them.
manager. Yeah.
The question I have, I agree with you. I think the select board should appoint the police chief and fire chief. But once they're in office, would the town manager then have some control over them? I mean, do they report to the select board directly, or do they report
For
back to the
disciplinary,
manager?
yeah, or,
That's,
You still have the day-to-day stuff, and if there's
Yeah.
personnel issues and all that kind of stuff, right?
That's a good question, yeah.
Like, they hold department meetings periodically.
Yeah.
Are they there, and are they somewhat deferential to the town administrator right now? Or are they
that's what I would,
independent and a
that's going through
certain?
my mind, because they always meet, and he is like a supervisor over them, but still appointed by the,
So I agree with that. To me, it's another angle of what needs to be fleshed out. Plus, I think we should weigh in, and I think that's a good question for the select board as well as the TA with regard to how they envision, a charter in the future, or changes, embrace what exists, or do they contemplate changes?
these are all good, I never thought would be this deep into this one.
One of the other things you should think about are boards and committees, and, there are some boards and committees that are, appointed by the town administrator with the approval of the select board. So in that sense, you're avoiding all of this public interviewing and public, vetting of people, and you come, with a town manager, town administrator proposed slate of candidates for, XYZ committee. You think about that, and we're going to get to that later when we talk about the various boards and appointed boards and appointed boards in this case. And are there any that, would be good for the select board to delegate to the town administrator? If you're looking to make the organization a little bit more efficient, I think we can all agree that some of those meetings where the select board are interviewing and appointing boards and committees can be pretty time-consuming and so on. And I think the committee should think about, are there any committees that would be exempt from that process?
And we'll get to that point, right, where we actually go
Yes.
through all of these, right?
Yes.
But not now, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
F is to be clear that the select board continues, because I know they are currently the licensing authority of the town. And so, clearly it has to be subject to the consistency with general laws, but for the most part, I think the select board would be the licensing board for most licenses and permits.
And so licensing, we're talking about besides liquor licenses, but also like a dog license and
Liquor licenses.
dog licenses, what else?
Yeah, dog licenses,
That's a,
licenses for different public works type functions. Again, and then I believe there is, I don't know if there's anything that allows, the last sentence of the select board may delegate any licensing authority, so it really gives them the authority on licenses and permits, which they currently have, I believe.
Right, so we should know what those are too, though. And do we know where, are they delegated now? Like, for example, the dog license, I brought it as an example, but that goes through the town clerk.
Yeah,
But do we have that specified someplace, do you know, in the bylaws or something, that they've delegated that, or where does that come through?
I don't know that I can't recall that
Right.
that was ever delegated. I think the town clerk always had marriage and dog licenses. and
Yeah.
It was always, the board had,
So we should-
alcohol and
we should
entertainment.
know.
and- Yeah,
What's where?
probably in the general laws, yeah.
Oh, you think so? You think that's where?
I think it may be,
Maybe in general
yeah.
laws?
That's what I think, yeah. I don't think it's anything the town would have done. Maybe Anthony or Mel would have an idea on that.
Yeah, dog licenses specifically are delegated to the clerk and to general laws.
Okay.
Yep, which this provision allows it, notwithstanding, so it has to be subject to, their underlying authority in the general laws, but this is the language that I think literally every charter uses.
Okay.
G is about a financial audit. Now, you don't see this in a lot of, not all charters. And there could be one, this could be put in the financial section of the charter, but I liked it here because the financial audit is a very important thing. And so I put it in the select board section. I made it annual. A lot of charters will say at a frequency, required by law or something. There really isn't a lot of requirements under audits. There is one for federal funds. But I thought annual was good. You have in your bylaws annual, so I thought I'd keep the annual here. So here's the annual financial audit that's required, and that they have to be performed by a CPA or a firm of them, no personal interest and conflicts, and that the firm or accountant is appointed by the select board upon recommendation of the town manager. So that's its own separate section now. In terms of that.
Is that new, the annual? Because we didn't used to do audits all the time, did we, before we had the
Yeah,
issue?
it's always annual. Yeah, it's
We always
a-
had an annual audit? It was an actual audit?
Yeah.
We have,
Make me nervous if it wasn't.
Well, I just thought that they did a review. I wasn't sure that the audit was the word that they used before, but maybe it was.
It's
Okay,
in the bylaws as an
Okay.
annual.
all right, good. Very important for this town. We had an issue before, so.
It's not a-
Let's move on, Anthony.
Mel, before you flip pages,
Yeah.
could I go back up to B? And in
Sure.
the spirit, your comments earlier about you had a bias toward including language, I think you said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that would tend to strengthen the role of the town manager. Will we say elsewhere that the town manager will the town manager have any authority to enter into agreements, some agreements perhaps? Or will all agreements be strictly limited to approval by the select board?
I believe there are agreements that are exclusive to the town manager, and we'll get to that section
Cool.
just momentarily.
Got it.
I think these are intended to be very, very broad agreements that bind the community and create long-lasting, issues. But I think you'll see, as we get into more detail, the town administrator, some of the agreements that we're talking about.
Great.
Okay, if none other question, let's move to the next section. We're almost moving on. Another, in addition to audit, is a personnel system, and I see these in most modern charters these days. It is subject to the recommendation of the town manager, but basically, the select board, as the chief policy body, would be making adopting a personnel system. And here, we're talking about classification of positions, a compensation schedule that goes along with that, benefit programs, how you hire people, how you fire people, promote people, and so on. Now, clearly, the school committee is exempt from that by general law, I can assure you. And then here we really are going to begin talking about, well, who is going to be part of this system? Is there a reason why the light department shouldn't have their own classification and compensation system? And I think I heard something about that the last time we were meeting. And what other agencies of the town should be exempt from this personnel system? It's nice to have a consolidated personnel system for people who work in the same organization. And what happens is you have these independent silos, elected boards, who sometimes, do other things. And I'm sure you'll hear that from your town administrator. And so this is intended to not necessarily be involved in the details, but to create a system that everyone has to work under, personnel system. So
Would this go along then with our personnel director? I mean, who she has responsibility for?
I'm sure the personnel, the town administrator and the personnel director would be implementing this system and actually probably recommending, components of it, but it would have to be adopted by the select board.
Okay, when you say a system, are you talking about a computer system, or are you just talking
No,
about
no,
a
I'm
system, a
talking about
process?
a,
Okay, that's what I want to be clear of. Right.
Processes.
So if we
So
have
how do
that,
they, you know,
yeah, so it seems to me
Where do you
that,
advertise for positions and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what benefits do you provide, and so on and so forth?
right. So it seems to me that those would kind of go together, or maybe not, I guess that's the question. If the
With a personnel director?
director,
you're talking about?
then, you know, is the personnel director involved with the schools at all, with the light department? Completely separate? That's my question.
That's a problem too with the light department, because at least as I view it, there are many positions in the light department that are exactly like positions in the water department, or the building department, or DPW. And yet, I think there are two different personnel systems and two different rates of pay for pretty much the same kind of job. And so I'm not sure how that's gonna work.
I view Light and Water as a different entity. They've been separate since 1913, and they do have a different compensation plan than what the town has. Part of it comes under the part that to get qualified people to work on electrical lines and things, they're in competition with other municipalities, which makes their compensation rate much different than the rest of the town. So I regard that as a separate entity entirely. They have their own personnel system, they have their own compensation system.
Yeah, I know they do. I don't disagree.
And it works.
I don't disagree with you on that. But I do know that there are some positions in both sides of the house that are almost identical for the kind of work that they do, not the technical stuff, which I've always thought was something would probably not be making people in the building department happy.
You mean clerical or administrative positions rather than
or
technical?
outside truck drivers,
Oh, okay.
blah, 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 you know?
Truck driver,
But if
laborer.
they're clearly separate entities, then maybe that's
They're
okay.
separate entities, yes, but they work side by side, practically the same building.
Yeah.
I'm just beating a dead horse, forget it, yeah.
But it's, so I see it as the one on the first page, a delineation with regard to what
Right. What's carved
covered
out and
and what's carved out, yeah, correct. And I'd be fine with that, and I also support, Joe, what you were saying. There's good reason why light is separate, water is with light. I see no,
But I agree, and like you said, also separate, somewhere in there, we separate that, so we
Right.
don't even have to bring some of this up.
correct. To be transparent, make it clear as to who's where, and somebody else can ask and push back differently if they disagree.
I think this is well worded. It says, upon the recommendation of the town manager. So the town manager is driving it. But the select board will approve a body of policies and practices and benefits. And you're talking, these are big deals, right? There's a lot of laws and regulations. There's a lot of dollars wrapped up in the comp and the benefits. So I would think that it would make sense to have the select board approve ultimately this system on the recommendation of the town manager.
It's just a matter of needing clarification, you know, about exactly who this covers, because right now, it sounds like it says for town employment, but obviously, there's a lot of town employees that are not covered by this particular one. That's the only thing.
Right.
Well,
Spell that
just
out.
in,
Go ahead.
Ma'am, through the chair.
Yeah.
And Mel, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, in theory, the town could, you know, town already has some hiring, you know, it's already doing hiring. So this is not saying that, you know, the water and light department have to have the same policies and procedures as the clerk's office, so to speak. It just says that the power to create the policies goes through this process that is laid out in this part of the charter. So again, it isn't necessarily changing the hiring, the compensation or anything of that for these departments. It's just saying that if we make any changes, here's the process that we go through to do it. Because ultimately, the select board, as the sort of the highest level of the executive branch, is vested with the sort of the control of the town already. That is their sort of base level authority.
Could I ask about who approves labor agreements that are negotiated with, do we have unions in town here?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Has
We
the,
have a section in the, I think, when you get through the town manager, the next section, section 6, you'll see a lot of these questions come up.
Okay.
A lot of these detailed agreements and so on.
because that could be perceived as being part of a personnel system, collective bargaining agreements, so,
Yeah, it's spelled out.
okay.
All right, you ready to move on then from this right now?
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right.
Something else, Mel, you want to say?
Yep, I'm ready to go. The next section is section 2 of the same article, but this is where you talk about the appointment of the town manager, not necessarily the powers and the duties, but the appointment. And one of the areas is, what are the qualifications? And this phrase well, first of all, we all typically will say the town manager is serving by and at the pleasure of the select board. And that's the case in all cases, no matter what. You still have the select board appointing the town manager in all cases and supervising that person. So we like to make that clear. Here we talk about a term of 3 years, and also this terminology fitted by education, training, and experience in public or business administration. And then there is typically an exclusion for an elected, a person in the elected status of the town, that they can't just be appointed by the town manager as the town manager. There is this 1 year cooling off period, so to speak, in this charter provision. And then there's always a phrase that the town may establish additional qualifications, or maybe that should say the select board may establish additional qualifications. But again, with the exception of the restriction, this is pretty standard language. There are other restrictions in other communities about the town manager. I think the most common and somewhat controversial occasionally is the residency issue. There are some communities that have not gotten rid of that and require their town manager to become a resident of the town within a certain period of time. I would say if there's a trend, it's to not make the town manager a resident. I think given the ease of moving around in Massachusetts and so on,
Excuse me.
and the cost of housing and all that stuff tends to, but I did want to make that point. But at least let's talk about the 1 year provision for elected officials.
Was that? Yeah, I was going to say, Tim.
Well, I guess I can live with the 1 year limitation. I would just want to make sure that I think in the past, in the state, in the ethics laws, it was a shorter time period than that. And is it permissible in a charter to be more stringent than what the state law prescribes? If it is, I mean, I'm fine. I think it does sort of eliminate the idea of the board kind of self-dealing, and picking one of their own to be the manager with the 1 year. But I thought it was like 30 days or something in the general laws.
I don't think that would be necessarily applicable here. I think they're two different sections. I've seen this provision a lot in charters.
You were in that situation, right?
Well,
You went from being
that's
select
why
board
I
member to the town
bring it
administrator,
up.
right?
That's why I bring it up.
What was the? You
The result was I had to resign from the Board of
Right.
Selectmen at the time
Right.
for 30 days before I could apply
I see. It
to
was
be
30
town
days.
administrator. That was
Okay.
the law at the
I
time.
remember that, yeah.
So whether it's
Yeah.
still the law, I don't know, but if it were still the law, someone could say, state law says it's 30 days, why do you, I don't think I should have to wait a year. You're going to have a new town manager within a year.
Right, you're right, yeah. Then you're basically not, right.
If I may.
Sure.
So this 21A of, again, we're not here as lawyers, so I don't want to sort of say too much about.
You are a lawyer, aren't you, Anthony?
The statute. I am.
You are a lawyer.
Well, yeah, so I don't want to give you too much, but the statute, 21A of 268A, which is the ethics statute, does, we talked about this earlier, and it does talk about this 30-day period of termination that maybe what you're referring to. The charter you're going to pass is going to be a special act, so you could go higher. You can't go lower than the state law. You can't be more
Yeah,
permissive than the
that's
state
what
law.
I was asking. I'm okay with going, for the year. If that's, it's obviously legal, I guess, then to exceed the state rule.
Even though that would have precluded you, and that situation worked out fine, actually, right?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it did, but
But that's
I
kind of
can see,
unusual, I guess.
well,
but-
yeah.
Do people understand, so Tim was on the select board, and then we had the opening, and then, so you resigned and
Right.
applied.
The state law that applied was.
And he had the qualifications, he had the background, he had everything.
Couldn't be on the board for 30 days before you would apply for the position. And this is saying it's going to, the period will be a year. So that,
Basically say you couldn't do
so
it
you-
because.
so you're, I think you're talking about former board members applying to be the town manager, because nobody probably could, I can't see this 1 year thing, how that would work if somebody were.
Give somebody a
being
3-year
practical.
contract, then you're out.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, you may want to wait to go through the whole section, because Mel does have a section on vacancies in the town manager's office. So it may just be good to see the whole article and then come
Okay.
back to that.
Okay. All right, interesting.
322 is an interesting one. The reason, I don't really see a lot of these in charters. And the select create a screening committee. This is a selection committee. They'll do that by vote or, make it a temporary committee. In Littleton, your bylaws require such a committee. And there's very prescribed membership and so on. And I didn't think that was good for a charter, the details of that. But if the town feels it has to have a town manager selection committee, then this is the language that I would use.
Yeah, I would say that it's fine to refer to it in the charter, and the bylaw can remain the bylaw. There's much more detail about the committee and how
Committee,
it
how it
does
works.
its job, and that's fine, that's appropriate. I think we should have a committee every time we,
Yeah.
yeah. Especially if it's going to be a town manager.
Well, and the language says may, so if the bylaw changes, it's not saying that we have to do it, it's just that we may or may not do it.
Well, we could change may to shall, if,
Do we want to be that prescriptive in the charter?
Yeah,
I could
I've
imagine.
served on several of those, and I think it's a real good idea to have public input, citizen input.
I agree, but it's already covered in the bylaws, so why codify it in the charter?
Well, does the bylaw say shall? Or does it say
I
may?
think it's,
I think it says shall, but then there's a sort of a provision that says select board could get out of it by a unanimous vote or something to that effect.
I'd like to see that stay, and I'd like it to say shall.
But then you're binding the
Yes,
charter.
yes. You're binding a lot of stuff in the charter.
But, okay, so I'll go back to several meetings ago, the differentiation between charter and binding it versus a bylaw that has the equivalent effect, but yet is much easier changed should the public select board want to make a change with regard to it. I don't anticipate that change, but I thought that we were talking about how charter should be ironclad, never to be revisited, and flexibility exists within bylaw. Therefore, I think strong language with regard to shall and bylaw covers it until such time it's changed, which would be a big opportunity for public input. And this concept of may allows for, language to dovetail with regard to defer to the bylaws to what the specifics are. But I don't care that strongly about it, to be honest. I just want to make
I mean, I
the
just-
point of how we've discussed
Right.
differentiating between charter and bylaw in the past and not having them ironclad, lock solid, because charter, I view, has a higher threshold for change, and
so we don't
Sounds
need it at
painful.
all in the charter? Is that I guess that's one way to look at it. We don't need that language at all. I look at it as kind of a heads up, like this is what we do
Yeah.
when we don't have a town manager, but it doesn't have to be there, because we've got the bylaw, and that's what the board would do, but
At the high level, it's good to point this out, that this is kind of how it's done, as opposed to, because it is important,
Well,
right?
it depends on whether you think it's important that we have citizen participation in the selection. Because if it's only in the bylaw, that can be changed by the board of select, by the select board, whenever they decide to do that.
But
Nobody else has input.
don't they have to have a public hearing for a change in a bylaw?
they're gonna go to town meeting.
For a town meeting, right?
Well, that's my point. So there's your opportunity for public participation. It's, because I don't want to be on the record as saying I'm anti-public participation. I'm definitely for public participation. I just think it exists within the bylaw.
But, oh, okay.
What if we had the case, and we probably beaten this to death, of an assistant town manager who'd clearly been groomed to be the town manager, so the town manager were leaving. So the intention was the assistant town manager is going to be promoted. Would this say you still have to go through the process, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe you want to do that, and not get rid of the personnel, or would you say you're wasting a lot of people's time to go through this if you know this is the person?
What I would not want, if I was to vote on this,
Yeah.
I would not want, my last would, for this to say, the select board shall, in our charter. I don't think we should bind ourselves in that regard. My next vote, or my next least favorite, would be what's in there. My preferred would be to say nothing about it in the charter, about the appointment of a selection committee. But what I would not want it to say is that the select board shall appoint in the charter.
And the board can waive the bylaw process if, in your example, there was clearly an internal candidate that had been groomed for the position, they could elect to waive the search process? And
I believe so. I'm trying to find it. And I,
Note from the bylaws to make sure, but yeah.
where does it say that?
In that hypothetical, if 321 were adopted, would that person that was groomed have to wait 1 year?
No.
they weren't-
No, because they're not elected.
Elected.
They're not
Just for
elected.
elected.
That's a good question.
That generally,
No, they're not elected,
if
though.
your assistant town manager or assistant TA is really good, you want to keep them.
Mel, 3-1.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Makes sense. Not put him through the process.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, currently, the language, actually, the language says they may appoint, but then it says under number 2, alternatively, select board may by a super majority vote waive the appointment of a TASC. So to me, it's required unless they go through this process and have a super majority vote to waive the process.
All right. So what do we say, just get rid of it? Is that what people are saying? I mean, saying you may obviously doesn't
Doesn't bind you.
bind anything, and it makes a point out there, this is how we usually do it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's just leave it.
Make them, yeah.
Everybody good with that for now? Okay.
Well, are we going to can it or?
No, we're going to leave it as it is.
All right.
May appoint.
Okay, very good. 323 talks about the compensation, other terms of employment for the town manager, pretty standard stuff, and it is covered by also a state law that allows employment agreements between the town manager and the select board. So that's pretty standard stuff. There's really nothing unique there. 323.
So that's
Any questions?
Yes, I'm sorry, Rob, yeah?
I'd just like to point out between 322 and 323, this going back and forth, like 322 says town administrator selection.
Yeah.
I think we're really talking town manager, and then I see in the 323, I see town manager in caps one place, and sentence above it,
Yeah.
it's lowercase. I just like some consistency, throughout the document.
We're going to get there for sure, I promise you. Under 324, this potentially could have been a qualification issue in 321, but often it's covered separately. But this asserts that the town manager's position is a full-time position, and that they should not have any other employment or certainly public office or elected, or engage in any business occupation during the town manager's term unless that is approved by the select board. So speaking personally, I've done some teaching from time to time, always needed to get my select board approval, not because of what potential conflict, but in that case, it was the time that was necessary to do that activity. In some cases, maybe a town manager is also a lawyer and they want to do some, probate work on the side or something that affect. This position is a very, clearly a key position, and anything that would create any sort of conflicts or diminish their authority because of other activities is a concern. So this is not really covering legal conflicts of interest. That's not the issue here. This issue is really about anything that would take the focus or any of the attention to the town manager that that the select board doesn't want to see. So pretty standard, I think. Mostly you see it if it's not in the charters, in their contracts, but I think it's okay.
So if they lived in another town and they were on a board in that other town, they would just need to get it cleared with the Board of Selectmen, Select Board, sorry.
Correct. Somebody once, when I was talking about this, said, "Oh, does this mean they can't coach their kid in Little League or, can't be, volunteering for whatever, food pantry or something?" And that's not the intent here, really. It's really, as this position said, it's a full-time position. And when you have a full-time position of this magnitude, you really have to want to make sure that that person is going to be devoting their full attention and not taking away from their reputation or the town's reputation by doing other things that are not consistent.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that section at all.
Okay, very good.
That's good.
Okay.
325 is an important one, and it just asserts the select board's authority and requirement to do an annual review of job performance. That has become a big issue for accountability in local government, and especially if you have a town. It's important, I think, that happens for both the select board, the town, and the town administrator, frankly.
Right.
I agree with all of that. I totally agree with it. The only problem is when it doesn't get done. Because it comes around and people don't want to do it, and it's awkward maybe to do it, and then you don't do it, and it could become an issue. It could become exhibit number 1 in a legal action. It says right in the charter that an annual review needs to be done, and it wasn't done.
Yeah, that would be a problem. I would agree with that. So if you don't think that the capacity is there to do that, then we'd have to want to look at that.
Can we do it now?
What's that?
Annual reviews of the town administrator? It's just standard personnel stuff. It
Yeah.
happens.
I know what that.
Public record? Well, it'd be anywhere.
Yeah, it was just discussed within the last 2 select board meetings in terms of their needing to get it done.
With the previous town administrator, there was like a long delay. It was something like a year and a half since his last review, and that was part of, I guess, the troubles that they had. So it can be a problem if it's not done timely.
And it usually happens when things are not,
I'm good, right, 'cause-
people are avoiding the negative situation,
Right,
tend to
sure.
avoid it. So I am a believer that everybody should get that. Sometimes I see that they don't, though, for one reason or another.
Well, I mean, it's in the charter, so that's the accountability lever. We need our select board to do their job. Sorry if you don't want to do it. I'm okay with keeping it.
I kind of view it as, this would be a good example. Don't know if there are going to be other examples as we get into things, but if we feel that execution is something that failure to execute it should be informed, the public should be informed, then I wouldn't do this as just one item, but if there's several, I could see you've got a responsibility to disclose to the public that the following tasks have been fully executed per the charter. Bing, 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 bing. But not for just one-off like this. If there's several as we go through stuff, then I'd be open to something like that to ensure that the public's being informed, because often we're not. And I'll give you another example. the Nagog Orchard, Charlie wasn't paying property taxes. When did we find that out? When did the public find that out? That to me is outrageous, and it just created another layer of challenges associated with the orchard that was very unfortunate. Yet I think the public should have been informed somebody should have gotten that done and shouldn't have looked the other way.
Okay. Okay, so leave it in?
Leave it in, just make sure we
Okay,
got
but
it.
you're right, make sure somebody does it, huh?
Yeah, okay. All right, and then, of course, we're gonna go back to this stuff, no concern. A vacancy in office. So what this says is that the vacancy shall be filled with all due haste. Now, there are some charters that create a time frame, but I always find that time frames are tricky. And if, a lot of it's out of your control. And so to the last point about, do we want to keep things in that we really can't perform, I would say that's a concern. So all due haste, I think, is not a legal term necessarily, but I think it implies, that it will be done quickly. And then what we have is during that time frame between the vacancy and the time before there's a permanent position filled, the select board can appoint someone on a temporary basis. That's known as the temporary town manager, but that's only lasts for 5 consecutive work days. So that's a very quick situation where you don't want any vacancy in the position for emergency and other reasons. So you have to have somebody in the position. And then after those 5 days, the select board can then designate a qualified person to serve as an acting town manager. And then that just refers to during such temporary absence or the town manager's inability to serve. So there is, a little wiggle room there, but it is important to have someone in the position of the town manager. What I'm concerned about is, with the acting town manager, could the select board sort of just avoid the problem? They found somebody who's good enough, and they're just going to leave that and see how it goes for a few months or whatever. Those are, I think, not, both parties aren't well served by that kind of situation. So the point is to try to get a permanent town manager filled as soon as possible.
So are you saying, as written, there's nothing from a time frame perspective to compel during the temporary town manager to then find a permanent town manager?
That's correct. The only thing is that phrase in the first sentence, with all due haste. You could put an outside limit, 6 months, 4 months, 3 months, but
So
my experience is that it takes a good 6 months to hire a town manager, at least.
Go ahead, Rob.
So I think I'm too focused on the last sentence about this temporary absence. It brings in aspects of illness, vacations, that sort of thing. So I find myself wanting to insert at the beginning, upon the resignation or removal of the TA or the town manager, But just to differentiate that, we're not talking about, because 5 days, I don't get the temporary absence of 5 days. That just strikes me as everybody is out for 5 days with one illness or another, or a vacation. Like, temporary absence of 5 days just strikes me as being odd to have that tight a measure. But I'd be comfortable with, upon removal or resignation, then it's differentiating to be when it's really a vacancy, not just quote a temporary absence. That temporary absence troubles me.
I guess what is the definition of a temporary absence?
I don't know. Confess.
Under that, it would be a 2-week vacation.
It's a good question, but Anthony, I don't know if you can help, but I think it does
That's how I
allow for
interpreted it. They're sick or
resignation,
they're out of the country or something.
retirement, or, some personal matter, illness, or some personal matter that requires a leave of absence of some kind, or, so it could happen.
But Bob, your situation is handled in sentence 1, isn't it? The position is vacant through, you said.
Well, I agree, it appears that way until you get down to this term temporary absence. Temporary
That's-
absences exist all the time. And I
Yes.
don't want to hear about them in select board meetings. I don't want to hear about them at all.
Well, but that's my question around how do we define a temporary absence? Because the example you gave is a vacation. Well, that's a planned absence. So is that different from a temporary absence?
And that's where, for me, the insertion of some language at the very beginning, upon notice being provided by the town manager / town administrator of an intentional absence or removal of the TA or TM or resignation of the TA or TM, all of that, adding to the front load of the sentence would then really bring the teeth into this with regard to establishing the rest of the paragraph to just be, if these conditions are met, then there's a responsibility with regard to execution or a capability with the select board to execute. Well, absent that,
But don't you still need someone in authority, even if it's only 5 days?
so on that, and
Yeah.
I'll look for everybody else, including, yourself
I'm
completely.
asking.
Yeah, no, and that, I think as I've read this section, proposed language, it's given to the TA/town manager to designate responsibilities for numerous departments and numerous, et cetera. So therefore, I see that as a capability if the powers are given to the TA or TM and given the ability to delegate, then that TA or TM can delegate in their absence while they're on vacation or,
Unless it's an emergency,
correct.
then you're,
But I'd almost think
can't.
that just common protocol would be if Jim's hit by a truck, somebody's going to take action immediately, even whether he deferred, and previously it said, in my absence, you step up, et cetera. That to me is how there'd be existing language with regard to somewhere in here, there's a statement with regard to the ability for the TM to designate
Yeah.
authority.
And I think, and Mel, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure if what the delegation language says here, but I think this section is to cover that unexplained, unforeseen absence, unforeseen vacancy. Particularly if you're focusing at the 5 consecutive days section, there's an unforeseen accident where, under this charter, the town manager gets much more authority than they have now. And so there are some things that they may have to do that they can't do. Now, technically, the select board can't just give the town manager's authority to somebody else, and somebody else cannot exercise the town manager's authority. So this provision provides the outlet to say, if for whatever reason we need something done, the town manager can't do it, right, is unavailable for sickness or something, the select board can point to someone and say, you now have their authority because the town manager didn't delegate it. I'm sorry, go on, Mel.
No, I totally agree, Anthony. I think this, as we've talked through, I think there's some areas that can definitely be improved in this section that will clarify situations. I mean, certainly we don't want the select board thinking that they can appoint somebody if the town manager's going on vacation or, is under childbirth, leave or whatever. So I think we need to clarify it a little bit more. And I made some good notes here, so we'll work on that.
Yeah, but I think, again, Mel, my memory is that the gist of this section is about those really unforeseen vacancies, something has to get done. We
Well,
just need an
that's the
outlet.
temporary, that's the temporary
Yeah.
one. The acting could or more, I find, acting managers, that happens a lot. But I think we have to clarify the unforeseen temporary situation, so I'll work on that some more.
Yeah,
all right,
it
good.
does need to be clarified.
Yeah. All right, that's good.
Now, removal and suspension of town manager is a long section, but, it's hard to avoid it. First of all, there's a few things. There are times, unfortunately, and when the town manager, for whatever reason, the select board is not happy with that person's performance and wants to remove them. maybe it's an immediate suspension because they need to do some investigation, or maybe it's just, we're going to bite the bullet and hope to terminate our manager. So there's a few things here. One is in 341. This one calls for a so-called supermajority, but we spell it out, an affirmative vote of 4 out of 5 members. So that's not required. It can be a majority. Some people have unanimous in this case because it's such a very significant action of the select board. But there's your, you have some discretion there. And then the next sections are really just about procedure. It's, there has to be a more formal resolution of removal, which then gives the town manager an opportunity to see that and to have a hearing and so on. There's nothing here that prevents the select board from terminating or suspending the town manager. The reasons for that are covered here, and it's totally the discretion and judgment of the select board. But this is the process that it goes about. So there's a lot here and a lot of time frames, but this is a pretty standard provision for a termination provision in a charter.
What do you know what does Littleton spell out now? Whether it's how many select board members have to vote to do this?
No, nothing.
There's nothing.
No.
So it's just a simple majority that would say.
Unless
The
it's
select
in
board
the
shall appoint and remove the
employment
town
contract,
administrator.
maybe, with the individual. I don't think there's anything in the bylaws, but
Okay, so it doesn't say it has to be 4 as opposed to just a simple majority.
like
And
2/3.
typically,
yeah,
what would happen, Betsy, is if there's nothing in a charter,
Yeah.
there would be an agreement between the parties, and the town administrator likely would require something like this. But I think the point of this is that would be a pretty significant action by the board, and there has to be some process. It's not so much for the town manager as much as it is for the public.
The part that, so I like it as it's written here. The only question I've got is in 342, the last sentence, where the notice would be given to the office of the select board. I'm assuming that's Lisa, and I'd prefer that to be the town clerk, because I think there's a town clerk's already established with regard to identifying public open meeting law and agendas and all that type of stuff. So therefore, they're very familiar with the idea of agendas for boards and committees being required 2 days in advance, that sort of thing. I don't see why this would go to the person that works essentially in a subordinate position to the TA or the TM. I'd rather see it be separated, because that person theoretically could be influenced with regard to, well, wait a minute, person might be on their way out, but what if they're not on the way out, and start to get fudgy with regard to timeframes. Town clerk, I think really has that,
Yeah.
that lock set
Well-
sort of position.
Madam Chair, yeah.
Well, where do you see that phrase about the office?
It's in the last sentence. It's in the sentence that starts with the town manager may file a written statement, but then it's right before the more than 48 hours before the public hearing.
Yeah, I see.
I would think we'd want to leave the town clerk out of this process. The select board is taking an action with respect to the town manager. Any communication by and through them and the town manager, it should go through their office. I'd hate to see the town clerk get caught up in a snafu with, oh, it wasn't 20 days, it was, the time frame is very tight and very legal, and I wouldn't want to drag the clerk, particularly, the clerk's got nothing to do with the town manager. I mean, that's not in her purview.
You see Rob's point, though. Lisa, reports to both of them, right? Really, kind of. So she's kind of in a tough spot.
Oh, I think she reports
To Jim, right?
Jim pretty
Yeah,
directly.
right. I don't have an opinion one way or the other at this point. I'm listening, but I see where you're coming from.
The resolution would be a public vote.
Okay. Okay, so in that case,
Okay. Well,
Made the point, appreciate being heard, can move on.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
Mel and Anthony, the one thing that concerns, or I would want to chat about a little bit is that the suspension cannot be for more than 45 days. That's, a month and a half? And an investigation, I don't know, I just could envision something taking, I don't know what do you got to, I just worry about limiting yourself to a suspension.
Yep. It's a good point. I'll make a note of that and think about that one. It's a
Okay.
good point.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on, Anthony, move up. Scroll up, please. Now we're going to be getting into
So
the actual.
let's go back, though, because
Okay.
it says up here, the affirmative vote of 4 of its members. We want to leave
Oh,
that
yes.
in, or
Oh,
we want to
yes.
leave that out?
I like that.
4 as opposed to a simple majority?
Leave it.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree. All right, great.
Okay, now we're gonna get to Article 6, which is really the meat and potatoes of the town manager's power and duties. So 611 is really the main section of this, and then it has all these sub-bullets. And the first one is just asserting that the town manager is the chief administrative officer, still works as for the select board, but is responsible and responsible to them. So that's just an introductory. The next one is important because here we need to start talking about whether we're going to have exceptions to this administrative authority with departments that are outside the jurisdiction of the select board. So this one says supervise directly responsible of all town functions under the town manager's control as may be authorized by this charter, bylaw, town meeting vote. So as you will see, as we get into certain aspects of supervision, we are talking about the town manager having certain control in those independently elected agencies, but we'll get into that, and this implies that that will happen. So why don't we move to next section, Anthony, next
Let
page.
the fun begin.
The C is the delegation authority. I think we talked a little bit about that. But, the town manager does have the power to delegate and subordinate some of their authority to employees. And that delegation is seen to be legitimate under the charter, that they're deemed to be the actions of the town manager, even if it's the director of public works or the chief of police.
Okay, Rob?
Yeah, so question, at the end of the first sentence there, it makes reference under this bylaw. I assume you mean under this
Yeah.
charter?
Yeah, that's a good catch, yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
And then the next sentence, I just find assumed or presumed, but to state shall be deemed the actions of the town manager, that just strikes me as a statement that it binds, I mean, inherently, if you're appointing and delegating and et cetera, you're the top official, but I would hate to see actions done in a rogue manner by a department head to somehow present an opportunity for somebody with an axe to grind against the TA or the town manager to then say, well, there it says in the charter, you know, you're accountable, you're responsible, anything you designated, you delegated this authority, and therefore you own all those rogue actions of that department head.
Well, I think it goes the other way too, though. If you're the town administrator and you know that that's in the charter, you're presumably not going to delegate your power to someone who you think.
But that's whereas we're creating a strong town manager, which is how the charter language to me is presented to us. There's only so many things that I feel that person should be accountable for. And maybe my example that I gave is too out there and unusual. I agree with you that they have a TA or TM has responsibility. Certainly if they're appointing, you know, different department heads, et cetera, they own it. But this sentence seems to be crossing that line with regard to, in a way that I'm not comfortable with, but again, I've been heard, I've taken, you know, a minute here, and if you don't feel strongly, can move on.
I don't read it as when they're appointing department heads that they're delegating their power. I read this as if they were to delegate their power as the town administrator, then whoever they delegate that power to.
That's the way I read it.
Yeah.
It's to make it perfectly
Okay.
clear that
Okay.
what I've delegated to you is,
It's me.
it's me.
So it's
You have to
above,
listen to
so
their
it's above and beyond, it's not the normal org chart, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay, I take note of the point that you're making, and I agree. I understand better now. Thank you.
And so it is interesting, though, that they can, we're saying that anything that the town manager does, they could delegate that to somebody else. They could say, I'm not going to do that part of this job, I'm going to delegate that to somebody else. I guess that's okay. I don't know what it wouldn't be, but it's just an interesting concept, though, isn't it? Think about it.
Yeah, but
Are there some things that you say the town manager they have to do that? What's
But
that?
if you know, under this chart, like, as the town manager, if you're going to delegate something, you better be sure
Yeah,
that
right,
you can trust this person, because ultimately, you will still be responsible.
right.
What if the town manager delegates going out and finding people to snowplow the roads
Yeah.
to someone? And that person goes out and takes bribes from private snowplowers. All actions that are performed under such delegation shall be deemed to be the actions of the town manager. That says to me that the town manager,
I didn't delegate the bribe.
he delegated the decision-making to find people to snowplow the road. In so doing, the person to whom it was delegated chose to do something wholly inappropriate.
That's on them.
Now,
No. What this section is saying to you, you're an employee of his, and I say to you, as town manager, for whatever reason, you're now going to supervise this employee. And I say to the employee, you listen to him because I've given him the power to do that. That's all it's saying. It's not saying that if you go out and kill somebody or take bribes, that it can come back and be the town manager's responsibility. That's not what it's saying.
If I may, and I apologize, I don't have a raise hand feature on my Zoom. So again, I'm trying not to sort of go off into this lawyer zone, but there is a concept in the law in which it says someone can sort of, if you give someone authority and they go off and they go and do something outside of that, right? They really go off on the tangent that you can't be sort of held liable. Now again, I can't sort of say in black and white, but I mean, generally speaking, if the town manager were to delegate someone some authority and they were to go off and do something that you would not conceive of in terms of somebody responsibly exercising their job function, you know, there are protections. Again, I don't want to put myself in a position of being like a litigator for some imaginary town manager, but that circumstance of like something illegal happening and then, oh, it's the town manager's fault because it says that in the charter, that's not a consistent sort of legal through line necessarily. So I just wanted to put that out there in terms of as you think about what this delegation means. There's basically, even with this language, there's a limit to the things a person could do that would ultimately be, you know, attributed to the town manager's delegation authority.
He said it better than I did, but he said the same thing.
Okay. Okay, move on.
Okay, all right. We are going to go to D, which is a very essential section, and it's the appointment authority of the town administrator. So in this case, we are, in this provision, it's giving the town administrator town manager the appointment authority and removal authority of all non-elected department heads. So I think, I don't know how many elected department heads you have, at town clerk for sure, but all other department heads under the jurisdiction of appointed boards or under the jurisdiction of the select board is to be appointed by the town manager, subject to select board approval. So I think the first point is there any non-elected department heads you don't want to be appointed by the town administrator. And previously, when we were talking about the select board, there were some discussions about the police and fire chiefs, and I guess there was, maybe town council, if that's considered a town department head, but I don't think so. So really, we have to decide if there's going to be any exceptions from this, and then what is the nature of the select board approval? So there's a range of that. First of all, every single recommendation has to be approved directly by the select board. Another way is that the select board has a veto. So they don't have to approve it per se, but they have to, within a certain period of time, veto it. And if they don't veto it within that period of time, then the appointment is effective, becomes effective, because the select board failed to act as a veto appointment. So different ways to achieve this select board approval. I think in a town like Littleton, it's not unusual for the select board to get involved at the end and maybe interview a final candidate or what have you. I assume that's how it's done today, and that's how I think this would be done primarily in the future. The appointment and removal or the department, under the department heads that have jurisdiction of elected body, the town manager shall consult with that body in terms of making appointments of employees, and that appointments must be done based on merit and fitness alone. So, sorry, I went a little on there, but I think the thing is, do you want to have any department heads not appointed town manager, subject to select board approval? How do you want to handle the town manager's involvement with other elected boards? Currently, they consult with them, but the town manager still has authority to make those appointments within those staff appointments within those departments.
Yeah, go.
Who wants to start? I don't know how it works with the library trustees. I assume they feel they appoint their own director. I'm sure, every board
You
of
do.
trustees I have ever worked with has felt that way. So, I think that, and maybe it could be as simple as the final decision being approved by the board after the trustees have weighed in with, this is our number one candidate. And maybe that's a way of making the provision work, where the manager isn't really, telling the trustees, I'm naming a new director for you, and here they are. But they're taking the direction from the trustees that this is the person we really want.
Yeah, but you're talking about the select board. Where's the town manager in this? I think that's the point. Town manager in terms of hiring these people. Because they're going to
Well, he has to
report. they're gonna-
consult, he has to consult with the trustees, right, or planning board, or whoever we're talking about, if they're still elected. And they're gonna have a preferred candidate or candidates, I would think. And he's gonna take his lead from them. He's not gonna conduct his own process, I would think.
I don't know. I guess I would be curious what other towns are doing in this. I just view more and more of these boards it's harder and harder to get people. They're part-time, and you got to hire people, and it's a process. And is that what they want to do? Is that the direction, or is it more that their policy and somebody else is hiring
And firing.
and firing?
This language as firing. I mean,
Yeah. So, Mel, what do you say to that?
Well, there has to be an acknowledgement that the elected board is a policy board. And there has to be some involvement with that policy board. Whether that comes all the way to approval or not, I don't know. I mean, it's possible that you could use the veto language, I guess, in that case. That might make it more beneficial. But, there are charters that just say town manager does not get involved in department heads with elected boards, period. And I don't think that's what you're trying to achieve here. That's the problem. I think you're trying to achieve more collaboration.
So, to make appointments or removals. So is the town manager consulting with the appropriate elected board, or is the elected board consulting with the town manager?
And let me add on, and can town manager basically convene the meeting to have the consultation and then completely ignore everything that was stated during that meeting? Because I think the authority, the way this is written, rests with the town manager, town administrator, to make that call. So consult, I can consult, but then I can blow you off.
That is true. That is the language
That
here.
is it,
that
you're right, that's what it
ultimate-
says, right?
But as far as I can tell, it still requires select board approval.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. That's where the placement of the subject to select board approval, does that phrasing, the way the sentence is structured, does that apply to everything in this paragraph? Or does it only apply with regard to the appoint and remove all non-elected department heads?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's not subject to the other elected board's approval, I will tell you that. So it's either subject to select board approval, and then there's no other approval required other than the consulting with the elected board. So, it's a good point. May not be totally consistent there.
Yeah, I think it could be, the sentence structure could be changed, because as that first sentence goes on, to approve the appointment rule, all other town employees, that to me should also be subject to select board. I don't want just a TA or a TM to just have this, judge and jury execution function. There's got to be some.
No, I think the idea is that the town manager is approving these, but they're not appointing. They're appointing. The appointments will be made by department heads that are under the level of department head, and that the town manager would just approve them.
Yeah,
make sure that they were hired.
It doesn't say that.
I don't think it says that now either. I agree with that.
Yeah, it says.
Well, for D, go ahead.
The appointment. Oh, you're saying it doesn't say by who?
Well, it makes it sound like the town manager's appointing him, and he's got to talk to the library commissioners, but he's appointing them, or he or she. So I think the first sentence needs to be, it's more of a collaborative with the board and the town manager to come up with.
I don't know, I think with that, I don't know if everybody else, where you folks are at. This is a pretty big one.
Appoint and
Right.
remove.
Exactly,
So
yeah. It's like he could just,
They have the ability to.
library commissioner said we
appoint
want
and
them and said, sorry, I'm hiring this
And yeah,
person
they
instead,
can-
and that's not the way we want it to work, clearly. Yeah. So Mel, you understand what we're saying?
No, not really. Could you repeat it?
So it sounds like the town manager is actually appointing the person. They're going to consult with the library trustees or the other, whatever the board is, but they're going to appoint them. And the feeling here is more the library trustees have way more of an involvement than that they may actually be the ones doing it, and that they should be consulting with the town manager to make sure they're all in agreement. But it's probably still the board that's driving the process.
So
The town manager almost has veto power or something like that to say, no, not that person. I won't, we can't hire them. Maybe that's the way we want to say it, I don't know.
I kind of like the veto part
Yeah.
of it, but just for my own, because I'm sitting here going, elected, non-elected.
Yeah.
So non-elected department heads
Right?
would then have to have their own discussion and bring that forward to the town manager. Appoint or remove. Yes?
So, yeah. Right, so just think about hiring somebody, right? So the
I
library
mean, it's a lot of
director.
layers.
Hmm?
That sounds like a lot of layers. Yeah, I mean, who ultimately is hiring the person? Is it the
Right.
town manager?
No, but that's the question.
Are they going to report to
It's
them?
really, I
Because then
think
we
it's
have all those
intended-
MOUs.
Right, exactly,
So-
exactly. Which is why the veto kind of comes in, because they're going to, and if the town manager has an administrative responsibility for these people, it sounds like in most cases,
Right.
so then they have to have some real say in who they're hiring,
Because
otherwise.
they've got to deal with the
Right,
day-to-day
exactly.
part of it.
See, I almost think it's the reverse. With all the MOUs, it appears to me that the separate boards, committees have said, you manage our department head. but it is, quote, our department head.
Right?
And therefore, if the decision came with regard to removal of that department head, would they view that as, no, that's too far. We hold that right. To me, this is a worthy of discussion as to where, who really it is, and that can go in several ways.
Yeah, because now the town manager could, in theory, get someone that they may not feel is qualified or is knowledgeable, and they're spending extra time
Correct.
training them or doing whatever.
If
and
they've
it
supervised
becomes a big
them,
time suck and.
Yeah,
you
correct,
know,
times,
it-
we've worked on it for over the
So-
last, X months, and I feel like I've exhausted, and I'm not tolerating, the conduct anymore, therefore, and what would be the role of that board or committee that prior to the MOU would have had complete responsibility for the administration and supervision of that person. Having said that, there's a lot of MOUs in Littleton that seemed like
Yeah,
those
really.
boards and committees have already given.
So how do you streamline that and still let the boards have?
So, well, I think the charter as it's coming in, we're
Right.
really putting into the role of the TM, a strong TM, should we agree and make recommendation, that would
So
institutionalize.
the town manager is accountable for the decision. The town manager is also responsible for the decision, and the board is consulted? Or they offer candidates, and the town manager gets to choose, or has that veto power?
You really talk about a whole form of government. What we're talking about is how whose jurisdiction is it going to be to hire, fire, and
Right,
this is important.
yeah.
That's where
You could require the board or committee to approve, just like the select board does, I suppose.
That was going to be my
That's a lot of
next-
process, but, it is sort of putting them on the same footing as the elected select board.
I mean, when I think about hiring someone that's going to report to me, I don't ask their employees to approve them. I don't really care if what their employees think, because they have to report to me, and I have to make sure that they're the right person for the job.
Here's the part that I think is challenging right now, and again, I could see us doing a loop back to this specific discussion once we get into board committees. Because a few months from now, if we get into I'm gonna use Park and Rec, all elected. So if they're all elected, then shouldn't their influence be considerable with regard to that department head?
If they're elected, sure.
It's the same.
And yet, where I don't know is, will we, several months from now, come to the determination of all boards and committees, not just Park and Rec, all of them, as they're elected today, should they continue to be elected, or will we recommend, maybe that should be changed? I don't know where that's gonna go. I just know that it's a issue in our charge to be specifically identified whether we believe it should continue as is with regard to elected versus appointed. It's a specific bullet item. And that, to me, would dictate where we would go. Once we get into that conversation, then I can understand, kind of to your point, what is the desire, collectively of the parties that currently fill those roles and need to shape our discussion.
I mean, I think the town administrator should have a say in who reports to them, but I don't think that they should also be given carte blanche, power to say who does and doesn't get the position. If the select board makes a recommendation, like you were saying earlier, as this is written, the TM can consult with them, but at the end of the day, they can say, nope, never mind, I want this person, which I think would set up the administration for some ability to be corrupt, because then you could just appoint, a bunch of people that are just going to go along with whatever this person says. But at the same time, they have to report to them. It's very difficult.
It's a knife's edge.
I like Karen's idea of a racy. You were going towards the racy, yeah.
Can I deconstruct the paragraph? With regard to non-elected department heads, the town manager has the ability to appoint and remove non-elected department heads subject to board approval, correct? That's the way it's written right now. So right now, for non-elected department heads, the town manager would recommend their appointment to the select board for approval. Paragraph D, clause 1.
No, they don't please.
So department heads, the town manager must recommend them to the board for approval. Is that correct?
It's what it says, but let me tease out your example.
Yep.
So solely focused on Park and Rec, because I can,
Is Park and Rec covered under the next sentence for department heads under the jurisdiction of an elected body?
it is on that, yes,
Yep. So that's why I want to deconstruct this paragraph.
okay?
So point D1, appoint and remove all non-elected department heads subject to board approval. Stop, period. Sentence 2, the town manager shall have the authority to approve the appointment and removal of all other town employees. No select board.
That's not
That's
how,
what it says.
no, I don't think that's what it says.
But as it's written, that's how I would.
That's
interpret it.
exactly what it says. Am I right, Anthony? Mel?
Yes.
Right. And then sentence 3 talks about a different set of circumstances. For department heads under the jurisdiction of an elected body, the town manager shall consult with that body prior to making such appointments. So 3 different situations, 3 different levels of authority or consultation.
Yeah, it's like you need a flow chart for each
So
scenario.
I
Need to
personally, I sort of
reread
like the flow of it, that for department heads, town manager recommends for approval. For the personnel assistant in the personnel department, that does not go to the select board.
Right.
For a person working in the head of the library, is that an elected board?
Yes.
That needs to either minimally go to consultation with that board. Maybe we could beef it up and say it's stronger, but I don't think we want the select board getting involved in this appointment or dismissal of the personnel assistant in the personnel department, do we?
No, that would take up way too much time.
Right. I don't think you
They
even
don't
want
do
to
it now,
implicate,
right.
I don't even think you want,
Can we call time and pick this up next time?
Oh, it's 8 o'clock.
Because I'm getting tired. This is a big topic.
You're right.
Can we ask them to take that whole paragraph and try to break it down into different sections?
That's what I was thinking too.
Different
Yeah,
order,
like a
maybe.
separate flow.
Or sub,
Completely, because
D1,
you have a
D2,
bunch of
D3
different
or
topics.
something.
Yes, 3 different scenarios.
Right.
Elected boards, non-elected boards,
Right.
so separate it and make it more concise and easier to understand.
yeah, so fire chief, police chief, finance, whatever. That's requires approval by the board. the
Should we
select
just
board.
do a big matrix for the big department head?
And take it
I
up
I
again.
like
Yeah?
the suggestion, breaking it out. Yeah.
Okay. You got that, Mel?
Yes.
Okay. All right, you want to,
Yeah, I mean, I'll go through, it's up to you, Madam Chair, how fast you want me to go through. I'll
no,
just.
because I think we're going to end up pretty quick. I don't think we're going to go over much further at all.
Good, all right, well, the next one, I would just say,
No.
this is.
No,
about-
okay, I think
Stop.
we're done, Mel. I think we're done.
Oh, I got it.
I appreciate it, but
So prior to concluding, we discussed at the last meeting, potentially teeing up, will we want the TA to come in and speak with us? Will we want the select board? I don't know if notification's been given them of a potential date where we would like them to come, but I do think, because it's about to be vacation season, it would be smart on our part to get out conceptually with a X meeting from now, please tentatively pencil it in that we'd like to speak with you, because I was of the opinion that we had said at the last meeting that we were going to do something like that, and it's been 3 weeks between meetings, and if we go out 2 meetings, we're well into
Yep.
June, July, and so I just want to bring that up before we
Okay.
close the meeting.
So we
So,
want to have this one paragraph clarified first before we,
So I agree with that, but if we should be able to get through that the next meeting.
Right.
So I'm not suggesting in any way that they come to the next
All right,
meeting.
all right,
I'm not
'cause
suggesting
right.
that
I
whatsoever.
want that,
Let's say tentatively the meeting after that, because
Yeah.
by then we should be done with this.
If you're open to that, I just think we want to hear from them.
so who exactly do we want to have come for that?
My opinion, it's that, Jim Duggan, the town administrator, as well as select board personnel, the, conversation that I've participated in or witnessed suggests to me that they have thoughts and would want to hear from whichever ones want to come and talk with
Anybody
us.
else? Personnel director, what do you think about that?
When, I was
Oh.
actually gonna ask, are we also talking about connecting up with certain, what's the finance committees? The
yeah.
finance committee?
Oh, yeah, we'll,
the
all-
that's in the future.
Eventually.
yeah, as we get to them,
It's got a
absolutely.
separate work plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We're just talking now about if we need to give people notice for 2 weeks, or 2 meetings from now, 4 weeks from now, who would that be? Who would we want to come to talk about these specific items, especially this whole,
yeah,
I think it's
the
just
TA has
the
got to come. Our
administrator
advisor,
select.
Gary,
Yeah.
yeah?
at a minimum.
certainly would like him to be here tonight, would have helped us with this.
Yeah.
And
And the,
you think the personnel director, do you think that's
No.
appropriate for this or not? No?
No.
we don't need
Just-
them.
No?
The TA and the select board members who
Okay.
want
Yeah.
to be,
Yeah, because we're talking about their roles
Okay,
and their
okay,
authority.
Chairman of the select board
Okay.
and Gary.
okay.
I'd put it at a different meeting pending the discussion with them. If they started to move away from what exists like a strong police chief or strong fire chief, then I'd want to hear from those people.
Oh,
But
yeah,
that's too far
that's
out.
when we get
That's
further
way
down,
out.
That's
absolutely.
too far out.
Yep, okay. All right, let's quickly, somebody make a motion on the minutes from last time?
Move to accept the minutes
Okay,
from the last
discussion,
meeting.
discussion.
Oh, wait, second first.
Second.
Okay, discussion, I believe that Kyle was absent from the meeting, but Kevin, you were here, and yet the minutes reflect that Kyle was here and you were not, so I think that change has to be made.
Okay, when you see stuff like that, I recommend you just send it to Charlotte right away, whoever did the minutes, and get that fixed. So just so you know, I mean,
Okay,
it's
going
fine here,
forward, okay. I
Yeah.
just don't want to act independently, because I can make mistakes too.
but just mention to her, I think that's what happened. But anyway, so that's, all right, so you'll get that in the minutes to
Yeah.
to fix that.
Assuming you agree.
Should we,
If it says I was here, I most certainly was not, so,
okay, so do we have a motion to accept the minutes as amended? Is that the
So
way to do it?
moved.
yes, it is.
Okay. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn? Or anything else for you guys? You're going to reschedule the next Monday meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's our off week. All right, anything else? Anybody? Before I cut everything off? You guys good? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to click the